Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why No One Plays. It's a series where I talk about unpopular champions in League of Legends, especially within the past few years. And for today, let's talk about Kalista, the Spear of Vengeance. If this is your first time watching one of these videos, I just want to establish that obviously people do play Kalista, but the point of Why No One Plays is to bring forth discussion about what makes them not an appealing champion to the general player base, and hopefully, this video can also raise more awareness about the champion and encourage some viewers to give them a try. For those who do main that champion, I'd love to hear your own experiences with them and why you decided to pick them up even though very few people do. But before we begin this video, I'd like to first recommend that you watch Exil's video on Kalista because he does a great job telling the long and tumultuous history of her. I will be presenting my own points about the champion, but his video is good for lending very much needed context for those who've never seen this champion since like 2016. I don't blame you. She's one of those champions you only exclusively see in the professional scene, and the ones you do see in solo queue are either smurfs or hard feeders, never in between. So I suggest you pause this video and go check out that one first. I promise it will be worth your time. I personally am a big fan of his work, and for those who've already watched it, let's continue on with why no one plays Kalista. The bot lane has seen a gradual but noticeable transformation in the latter half of League's first decade. Prior to Season 5, the definition of an AD carry was very unilateral. Physical damage dealers that rely mostly on their auto attacks for the bulk of their damage, starting out relatively weak early game but then ramping up once they pick up some crit chance and attack speed. The formula for marksmen was also pretty simple. They usually had a damage dealing ability, a buff or dash of some sort, and then either a secondary damaging tool or a little utility which would usually come in the form of some crowd control. So Twitch's E covered damage, Q was the buff, and W was the ability. Caitlyn's Q was the damage, E was the dash, and W was the utility. Ashe's Q was the buff, W was the damage, and E was the utility. Jinx's Q was the buff, W was the damage, and E the utility. There wasn't a whole lot of variance in playstyle between each champion. More of a preferential bias, sort of like how some people like vanilla ice cream over chocolate, but it's still ice cream. While we've had Ezreal, Corki, and Kog'Maw who were Triforce users, the resemblance was still present among most if not all of the marksmen. That was completely shattered when Kalista was added just before the start of Season 5. Ever since then, Riot has become a lot more ambitious with creating different kinds of ADCs. Their first one was just sort of an accidental masterpiece. Kalista stands as the most mechanically difficult champion in the entire game bar none. I don't care what anyone says. There is no champion who comes anywhere close to the skill ceiling that she has, and the way that skill is expressed comes through her unique passive, Martial Poise. Despite the somewhat complex amount of text on screen, it's pretty intuitive. Every time you use a basic attack on Kalista, she sidesteps in a target direction, sort of like how Vayne players auto then press tumble right after, only for Kalista it's tied to her entire gameplay. She is the ultimate attack move AD carry who dances around a fight, using her infinite amount of dashes to dodge skill shots, kite away or chase after enemy champions, and overall be a very slippery target to deal with. Meaning those with remarkable tact and battle instincts outplay so many situations where other marksmen won't be able to. When presented that way, you would think she's the perfect ADC. Why would anyone not want to play a champion with seemingly infinite dashes who can dodge practically anything in the game? After all, you don't need protection or defensive abilities when you're unable to get hit, right? And it is correct to make that assumption because that is exactly why she's so unpopular to play. Kalista literally trades in everything else that makes an AD carry strong, betting all of it on her passive. She has no combat utility, no self buffs, no self peel, just damage and in-fight mobility. All conventions of what constitutes a marksman are thrown out the window as the only thing you can do on Kalista is deal damage, nothing more. The rest of her kit is explicitly designed for two things, auto-attacking and execute. She still retains a damaging ability in the form of Pierce, which throws a spear over twice the range of her normal attacks, but it still has the same properties as a basic attack, just dealing anywhere between 20 to 280 more damage. One extra component is that the spear, true to its name, pierces through targets if it kills them until it stops on the next target that doesn't immediately die from it or reaches the full distance. The second part of her Q is what you'll almost never be able to reliably use in most games, because not only do you have to ensure your Q does enough damage to last hit the enemy in question, but you also have to line up the shot to where it successfully reaches a champion for a pseudo Darius ultimate reset. The only time I've seen people reliably make use of Pierce's unique component is for chip damage in lane, where you would do a few auto attacks on the minion wave, then use Pierce to take them all out at once, transferring the combined stacks to a champion for some quick burst. And of course, there are clips of people chasing a free kill by stacking up on Gromp, then sniping out an unsuspecting foe, but in all honesty, how many scenarios do you expect that would work, let alone come in handy? Interestingly enough, your auto attacks and Q aren't the bulk of your damage, rather, it falls to Rend, your E. Hitting an enemy target with basic attacks and Pierce applies stacks up to 254, although you'll only ever see 5 to 10 at a time, 20 on Dragon or Baron. When activated, the spears explode, dealing damage for each one. On paper, you can think of Rend as bonus damage on your auto attacks, since each spear will do X amount more damage when you cast Rend. Not unlike Kalista, who builds up plasma stacks for a big chunk of burst damage when she lands the last hit. An insanely powerful ability given how much damage it can do in one blow. But the caveat is that you have to be in combat long enough to accumulate that many stacks. To do this, you have to constantly put yourself in range of enemies with nothing but your ability to attack and move. You have no attack speed buff to enable you to rack up stacks quickly in a short amount of time. You have no form of protection to stave off counterattack to allow you to rack up stacks. And you also have no form of crowd control to lock down targets long enough to get those stacks. Kalista has one of the best abilities for sustained fights, yet she's missing pretty much every tool needed to make use of said ability. Once again, the only weapon you have at your disposal is your ability to make quick movements during a fight to dodge skill shots or keep your distance from pursuers. Completely stripped of any protective assets you would expect to have at least some semblance of, the only thing separating you from your opponent is 525 units of range, which is hardly enough to spare you from the wrath of even most melee champions. In this tight zone, you have to safely and quickly rack up stacks on targets to make use of Rend, your main source of damage. And trust me when I say it's difficult to get even 10 spears on a target in most fights. Since Martial Poise gives Kalista some of the best combat mobility in the game, along with Rend's quote-unquote infinite amount of damage she can deal, she deliberately has to be kept extremely weak to compensate. For starters, Kalista has a permanent 10% damage nerf, as her auto attacks only deal 90% of their actual damage. Pierce has a very high mana cost and long cooldown for being an ability that just deals damage, and not very much of it. Additionally, she's one of the weakest champions in the game in terms of base stats, and they don't get much better over time. Extremely low armor, health, and mana even for a ranged champion. The skill floor on Kalista goes far beyond what many people would consider fun, and even those who crave a challenge would look at her and think she's just simply not worth it. Generally speaking, you want a champion to have an equal return on investment upon achieving mastery. For example, if you have someone who is 30% weaker than a normal champion in the hands of a brand new player, it's fair to expect them to also be 30% stronger than a normal champion in the hands of an experienced player. For most AD carries, that level of difficulty remains consistent. Vayne is touted as being a very difficult champion to play, virtually useless when piloted by a novice, but when played by someone with amazing reflexes and presence of mind, you can practically 1v5. For the sake of argument, let's just assume that she would be in the 50 to 150% range. Kalista sadly gets completely screwed over, as her range is more like 40 to 120%. Why she's missing an extra 40% on the upper end is because you will theoretically never be able to reach that point on her due to the fact that she's kept permanently weak as a champion. She doesn't age well either. I've repeated this over and over again, but League is becoming faster. Not only are champions becoming more mobile, but items are as well. We have Stridebreaker, Prowler's Claw, Protobelt, and Gale Force giving tons of champions that Kalista used to kite very easily the ability to completely neutralize the only advantage she has against them. Now champions like Garen, Darius, Rek'Sai, and such went from being almost useless against Kalista to now being hard counters. There are so many things working against her. Her damage and outplay potential is so incredibly high that Riot is forced to cripple her to prevent that from happening too often. Except what they really did was prevent it from happening, like, ever. Even if you're the representation of peak human performance, Kalista's weaknesses overshadow her strengths in all realistic scenarios. Arguably the biggest reason why so few players bother fielding Kalista is because of her almost impossible difficulty. I know for the past few champions in this series I talk about how difficult they are to play, and that's not always a bad thing. Some champions are meant to be harder to play to balance out those who are more beginner friendly. However, there is a fine line you have to stand on to create a champion who is both hard and enjoyable to play. Elaborating on that a little bit more, Kalista feels almost like half a champion, and that's because she is. Two of her other abilities are completely unusable without the presence of her Oathsworn ally. One champion she designates out of her 4 teammates, which is usually this support. Sentinel can be used by itself, although it's invariably a downgrade to Ashe's Hawkshot, and it provides you nothing of value in combat. But when you and your Oathsworn successfully attack a target in quick succession, it deals a chunk of max health damage. What this means is that Kalista is weaker without her partner, and in this day and age where supports roam a lot more than they used to, that percent health damage cannot be viewed as a dependable factor to Kalista's overall DPS outside of lane. The Sentinels give her some token amount of vision without the need for wards, but due to their very narrow line of sight, they don't count as trustworthy field of vision. Another issue is that Kalista straight up does not have an ultimate, period. Faith's Call can only be activated when she's near her partner, and while it's an incredible ability to have, essentially turning your Oathsworn into a Malphite ultimate, Kalista does not get to dictate where to fire the support. That is completely up to the latter. You essentially have no ultimate, rather you give the support a second ult. I completely understand that this can be utilized very effectively with certain champions like Leona, Thresh, or Alistar who can extend the CC chain for some crazy two-man wombo combos, but it's a non-existent ability without the presence of someone other than yourself. Not that I'm calling you guys out, but AD carry mains don't trust in anyone but themselves in solo queue. Then again, that's all of us. Placing your most important ability in the hands of someone that you don't even know is an instant deal breaker for many, which, along with her own internal limitations, entails a champion that quite literally was never meant to be played in solo queue. Bringing me to my final point, Kalista is an objective-focused AD carry thanks to the high damage potential from Rent, making her really good at securing Baron and Dragon. Having a team that unanimously agrees on a win condition in solo queue is rarer than a Yasuo main who doesn't feed 10 kills by 20 minutes. Even though Kalista is really good at taking down objectives, she still requires a team willing to prioritize them with her. Fortunately for her, overall appreciation for objectives has gone up thanks to Dragon Souls and the ridiculously overpowered Elder Dragon buff, which should increase her favorability, right? Nope. Riot nerfed her rend damage on Epic Monsters too because of how strong she was in pro play for that. Kalista is such a flawed champion because if given even a tiny bit of concession, she goes from being the worst AD carry in the game to one of the best in the game. Therefore, she has to be made very weak in order for her upper limit of strength to be something only those who mastered her can achieve. Thing is, she's too weak that so many other marksmen have Kalista's strengths with not even half of the drawbacks. She's just a balanced nightmare. Riot has to make some very major changes to her to make her a viable pick in both pro play and solo queue. While this goes against her nature as an extremely high skilled champion, I think they just need to close the balance of power in her kit because in her current state she's just way too broken. Not broken as in she's overpowered, but broken as in basically Kalista cannot function. They did somewhat of a similar change for Ryze that angered a lot of Ryze mains because they made it much easier to play in exchange for not being as super broken 1v9. I'm not saying every champion needs to be viable for both solo queue and pro play. We have champions like Garen and Darius who are great solo queue champions, but you pretty much never see them in LCS or Worlds, and vice versa. There's nothing wrong with that, but Kalista is in a state where she's just not viable for both theaters of League of Legends. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, what you think should be done with Kalista, or if you think she's fine as is. I would very much like to hear your defense on that because I think it is sort of prevailing wisdom that she's just a mess of a champion. Almost on the same level as Ryze, who got reworked like 20 times. Thanks to everyone who watched all the way to the end. If you enjoyed the video, a rating would be much appreciated, and if you would like to support my channel, best way you can do so is like the video, leave a comment, share this with your friends, and subscribe. If there's a champion I haven't covered on either Why No One Plays or Why Everyone Plays that you would like to see next, you can consider making a donation to my Patreon page, as patrons can put in a request for a specific champion to be covered. Aside from that, all links to my other platforms can be found in the description below, and if you want to continue watching, I have a playlist that shows you every single champion I have covered so far in Why No One Plays. But for now, that's it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon for the next video. Take care.